I mentioned that to indicate that indeed the movement itself was not a one-man show or one-person show at all whatsoever. So after that conference, I committed myself to organize. At that time, I was general manager of Blackwood Hodge. I actually went on paid terminal leave in order to free myself to be able to be full-time on this campaign. One of my early ventures was that I sought to meet with Mr. Vernon Mwanga and Mr. Alexander Chifanda, who obviously were already well known, and they had presented papers which to me showed that they were reformers. So I wanted to engage them in the possibility of joining forces towards a national conference. And I went to meet them at the Lusaka Golf Club. And at the Lusaka Golf Club, while they were making the rounds around the greens, I happened to have met Mbita Chitala. And we sat down while waiting for these people to go around. I had not met him before, and he introduced himself. We discussed. Then I was fascinated when I discovered that he had actually known some of my comrades, Sami Amin of Egypt, as well as Ibo Mandaza of Zimbabwe, and that they had actually written a book on the proceeding of some conference together. This impressed me, so I revealed to him my idea that we should have a national conference. So that's how basically I teamed up with him, and we had discussion with Mr. Mwanga and Mr. Haman at that time. Then I also made plans to go to the Copper Belt to meet the trade union movement leaders, because from 1984 onward, when I was in Quito as general manager of Zambia Ceramics, I had been involved as a resource person at their various conferences. And some of my ideas were already being presented to them and being well received. And I certainly wanted them on board. And so when I did go to the Copper Belt, I went to the headquarters of the ZCTU and met with Mr. Zimba, met with Mr. Chitaru Sampa, and Mr. Lungu, who was their financial person there, and particularly Ages Mukupa, who was the deputy director of research there, and others. And we discussed, and I put forward my proposal, and they suggested that it was important that I should meet with Mr. Chiluba, who was in Ndola. That other meeting I'm discussing was in Kitwe. So without any hesitation, we did go to Ndola actually, and we found Mr. Chiluba at Atlas Core meeting, and had a very good meeting with him in his small office, and put forward our ideas, which fascinated him and excited him so much that he actually offered that after the meeting we should go to lunch, and we went to lunch to the Savoy and discussed further details. At that luncheon, we were agreed on the way forward towards the national conference to look at the multi-party option, and we agreed on dividing a division of work, that we will prepare the conference, organize the conference, and the trade union movement would assist us to find funds. That is what happened. That was about the same month, in March. However, after March, Mr. Chiluba and Mr. Zimba somehow went to Geneva on their trade union business, which we thought was a trip which would be helpful to our cause, that they may raise funds and so on. But in fact, it turned out, one, they didn't raise funds, two, they overstayed. And in the meanwhile, in June, there was a coup attempt led by Luchembe. And this really frightened me, because the last thing we wanted in our strategy is for Zambia to fall under the trap of military coups and to have another Master Sergeant Doe or some Amin or some Bokassa in charge of the country. So this made me want to speed up the process towards the national conference on the multi-party option, which I thought was a narrow, peaceful option that we had to address our problems of how to overcome the one-party state. So while they were delayed in Geneva, we went ahead and planned. At first, in anticipation that they will raise a lot of funds, we planned that this meeting should be in Livingstone at Musotunya Hotel. In fact, I had started drafting the resolutions of Garden under the theme of a Musotunya declaration. But when they delayed and the funds were not forthcoming, we had to adjust our plans to a Lusaka meeting in a small hotel, which was Garden Hotel on the outskirts of Lusaka. While we were planning, before the time came, the date we had planned, Mr. Chiluba and Mr. Zimba returned, and we touched base with them. At first, they agreed to the plan, but as the date was approaching, the trade union leaders were very hesitant. And at that time, on account of the Luchembe coup attempt, there was actually a curfew. So the day before the planned day of going to Garden came, Mr. Chiluba sent his emissaries advising us not to go ahead because they said they had intelligence reports that we would be arrested. At that time, I was young, I was militant, I had audacity, and I dismissed those brakes that were being put on our movement, and sent him a message that we were going ahead. He again sent the same man to say that, okay, let's adjust the program on two accounts. One, that we needed a permit. Two, that Mr. Chiluba and Mr. Sampa had a meeting, a ZIMCO meeting, chaired by President Kaunda on the same date. Again, I sent them a message that we were still going ahead, and that if they don't turn up at Garden, then we know they are with UNIP and they are with Kaunda. If they turn up, then we know they are with us. So we resolved to go right ahead. By that time, when the second emissary was sent off from my house, it was curfew time. And in the middle of curfew, I was happily surprised by a visit from my comrade, Remy Mshota, Dr. Remy Mshota, who came to my flat with his wife. And I told him how disappointed I was with the trade union movement, who were chickening out and who were preferring to attend UNIP meetings at ZIMCO rather than go ahead with the plan. And Remy assured me that he agreed with me that we should go ahead. He even vowed that even if it is only going to be two of us, he was going to come. And so that night we toasted that decision and resolved. We boosted our spirits by playing Martin Luther King speeches, records, Malcolm X's speech records. In fact, the Malcolm X speech record that we played was the one where it talks about house Negroes and field Negroes. And I used quotations from that in my welcome address the following day when we were at Garden. My arrangements for going to Garden was that a friend of ours, Masao Sopili, was going to give me a lift to Garden. He didn't show up. So I had to go out on the road and look for a cab. While I was looking for the cab, Another friend of mine who had just parted company with the mines was driving a very smart red sports car, Bob Sichinga, passed by and stopped and asked me where I was going. So I asked him to drive me to Garden, and he did. When we reached Garden, we found, which is now very common, but in those days was not very common, we found 2 policemen with AK-47 at the gate. They just stood there. We slowed down, they didn't say anything. So we proceeded to go through to the front desk. Then when I got out of the car, Bob, who had given me a lift, left me there. Then I discovered that the arrangements I had made for the Garden meeting had not been done. The room was not ready, and the staff at Garden House Hotel, which was owned by Theo Boo, had received instruction from Theo Boo, who was in London, that he had been approached by Zambian intelligence officers, warning him that rebels were meeting at his hotel, and instructed the staff not to entertain us. But by that time, I had paid out of my own pocket the 50% down payment that they had requested. So I insisted that, one, we were not a rebel group, we were acting legally, and convinced them, and that is when they agreed to start arranging the room. After I was alone for a long time, maybe 30 minutes, maybe 45 minutes. Then the first person who came was Edith Nawaki by cab to join me. And I told her the position we were in, that we are not even sure whether people are going to turn out. The trade union movement have not committed themselves, and that the room was not clear, and that I still owed 50% of what we had promised. Edith, being more business-minded than myself, she immediately helped me to set up the room and proposed that we'll put a desk at the front door and ask those who come to also donate towards the date that we had, which would have covered lunch as well as the hall. So I mention this because some people have asked that when we went to Garden, where were the women? So the second person after me who came to Garden was a woman. She was Edith Nawaki. And later on, of course, we were joined with many women. Miss Mulenga Maine, we had Kavunda Kayongo, who became stars of our movement, and so on and so forth. So that this is the background with which we went to Garden. And after a little while, people began coming. First slowly, then quite suddenly, the room was full. Our trade union leaders, by that time, they had actually gone to attend Mr. Kaunda's meeting at Zimco, except that it was cancelled. So after it was cancelled, somehow by 11:30, they made their way to Garden. By that time, the meeting had already started. Of course, I was very furious with them, very disappointed with them. But in the course of the discussion of that evening, because by that time, the meeting had sparked. There was a spirit I'd never seen in Zambia, of bravery, of people speaking freely and speaking revolutionarily without apparent fear, and committing themselves to the demand for a multi-party democracy. So that in the end, we held a meeting on Friday the 20th of July, and it went on to the following day, the 21st, and on the 22nd of July 1990, we held a press conference reading out the resolutions of MMD. MMD, not as a party, but as a movement. Not as a party, but as a movement to campaign for the return of multi-party democracy. I should also say that at that time, the UNIP government had taken a step back and proposed to hold a referendum for the Zambians to choose whether or not they want a return to multi-party democracy. So when we met at Garden, was to resolve to campaign for the Zambians to vote for the return of multi-party democracy. The rest is history. That after Garden, the response of the people all over the country was such that the UNIP withdrew the referendum, and between July and December 1990, they also accepted the idea of changing the constitution back to a multi-party constitution. So that the last week of December 1991 saw various measures taken, which included actually the removal of Article 4, which banned other political parties, which denied Zambians their right to freedom of association in that sense. So that is the background I wanted to give today on the memorial of the meeting in Ghana, the 30th anniversary of the meeting at which the movement for multi-party democracy as a movement was established. I think that as part of this reflection, I will read out the 10 resolutions and make a few comments as to what has happened since those resolutions and what could be possibly be the way forward.